If you or your partner has ADHD, you may be experiencing some problems. Did you know that around 8% of American adults are diagnosed with ADHD? So, not surprisingly, relationships can suffer. Whether you are the person with ADHD or you love someone who has the diagnosis, ADHD affects you both in important and understandable ways. But please don't lose hope. I promise that therapy can help. So, what is ADHD? It's a brain difference that makes it difficult to remember important details or tasks, to get and stay organized, to manage your time, to maintain focus, and to follow through fully on projects. Different people experience different symptoms, but intense feelings and reactions are a common concern for most people. These symptoms impact not only the person with ADHD, but also the person who loves them. It is often underdiagnosed in adults, and times have certainly changed. So many adults were never diagnosed as children, and that means that adults with undiagnosed ADHD are often struggling with its symptoms, and they have their whole lives maybe, but they don't know any different way of being. They just assume this is how they are, and in life, work, and relationships. So having it or loving someone with it can make you feel entirely helpless. If you don't have ADHD, you may feel resentful sometimes, and if you have it, you may feel a lot of shame. Understandably, you may fear that your relationship is beyond repair if things have really gotten out of hand, or if your symptoms have really interfered a lot. But don't worry, there's always hope. It's common for us at Couples Counseling ATL to see couples who come in with ADHD, often one or both of the partners overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. The good news is that plenty can be done to help you to move out of your patterns. You can stop feeling hurt and frustrated all the time. So you may be wondering, how does ADHD affect your relationship? The common patterns that we see in relationships with ADHD are different for every couple, but often similar in some ways. I once heard a great metaphor for ADHD. So think of a house on fire. One of you is stuck inside it. There's smoke everywhere, and it's hard to see what's in front of you or find your way out. Your partner is circling around the house with hoses and sirens, and both of you are tired and at times even desperate. One of you carries the ADHD around internally and has to deal with it at every moment, but the other person lives in reaction to the ADHD. It's not always apparent to the partner with the hose that their partner may be struggling and is doing their best. The person without ADHD often feels like the rescuer or the adult in the relationship, and the person with ADHD often feels like the one who needs saving or the child, and neither person in a relationship likes this dynamic. So labeling ADHD for what it is, just a common challenge that you're both navigating, will help you to think of it in a different way with perspective and look at your dilemma together rather than at each other, pointing fingers with frustration. You can start to think more like a team with a common goal. ADHD affects both of you and leads to very common patterns. So if you're a person with ADHD, you likely feel anxious and worried about missing things all the time, like deadlines or important dates. I forgot to pick up trash bags. I was supposed to do that. It's very common to just feel really scattered. You often feel hurt and criticized by your partner about what you do or how you do it. It's normal to feel irritated about being nagged a lot to get things done, and maybe you don't feel very accepted for who you are. If you're the partner without ADHD, you likely feel hurt and let down all the time. It hurts your feelings and frustrates you that your partner forgets things that are important to you or that you've discussed. So you often feel kind of ignored or not important to your partner. You're often overwhelmed by all the stuff left for you to do. Feel often alone, like you're doing it by yourself. It's common to feel like you can't depend on your partner to, be there for you. You likely feel frustrated by your partner's intense emotions or their defensiveness when you ask questions. They may think it's coming out of nowhere, but this has been something that's really bothering you. You step on your partner's shame landmines all the time, and it kind of blows up in your face. You either want to blow up at them and get really angry, or avoid them and just, kind of retreat in a defeated way. Maybe you say to yourself, fine, I'll just do everything myself. Roll your eyes. It's totally normal to feel frustrated that the same old stuff just keeps happening. So remember that ADHD will always be a difference between you and not just couples with ADHD. All couples have major differences in personality, background, lifestyles, brains. This is a very common brain difference, and ADHD is just one that exists between you and your relationship. And according to the Gottman research, there are really only two kinds of problems in relationships, those that are solvable and those that are perpetual. Perpetual differences like ADHD, unfortunately, never go away, never. So it doesn't have to, but it can become gridlocked and never go anywhere and kind of become more of a source of pain, making you feel like you're in some horrible Groundhog Day where you wake up and have the same argument every day if you don't have the right skills to navigate that perpetual problem. But take heart, every couple, again, has these perpetual differences. It's like 69% of all couples issues are unresolvable and perpetual. But even the happy ones have these differences. So the difference between happy versus unhappy couples is that happy couples talk about their perpetual differences in a respectful, sometimes lighthearted way for the rest of their lives. It's an ongoing conversation. It's a difference that has to be managed. They're good listeners, and they avoid those pesky four horsemen behaviors like criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And they make a point to repair ruptures and hurt feelings when they go off track or when they hurt each other. So remember that if ADHD exists in one of you, it is your relationship's perpetual difference. So learning how to gently discuss your feelings openly and share your hurts and your frustrations so that your partner can truly just step into your shoes and hear you as their beloved, who's confiding in them, will help them to hear you instead of feeling criticized or attacked. Even if you're doing your best and using all these Gottman skills, your partner may still become reactive or defensive because they're human. This is when an expert couples therapist who truly understands ADHD and relationships is helpful for you to navigate those difficult conversations until you can both learn, to talk about this non-defensively and non-critically on your own. You're going to need a lot of practice. This is a lot like going to the gym to get stronger. These muscles of patience and attunement and understanding can be developed though. So it's important to explore how ADHD affects your partner. That's an important conversation we almost always have in couples therapy. You're asking questions like, what are they struggling with when it comes to this dynamic? What are some of the strengths that come from ADHD? Often people with ADHD are very bright and creative and can get really, really focused on something they're really interested in. Probably part of the reason you fell in love with them. On the other hand, if you're the one with ADHD, have you also sat down and thought about or learned about how your ADHD can affect your partner? How does it often feel for them when your ADHD affects them? And you can hear that without shame, knowing that I'm having an impact, even if I didn't intend to hurt them. It's really a very empathetic exercise to ask them, what is this like for you? I have the bad habit of leaving cabinet doors open all the time for the last 20 years. And my poor husband is beyond frustrated, but has kind of accepted that I have some quirks in my brain, definitely on the ADHD spectrum myself. So knowing and avoiding Gottman's four horsemen when you're talking about this difference is very difficult in any relationship, but critically important to learn and avoid each one of those Gottman four horsemen of the apocalypse. These are well-researched toxic behaviors that, again, exist in all relationships, but to much lesser degrees in happy, long-term master couple relationships. And if you've seen my other blogs, you know that they're criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. When they aren't dealt with, marriages are likely to end if these four horsemen continue to wreak havoc. One typical conflict cycle in ADHD couples is when the partner with the ADHD forgets, of course, very common, to do something, which leads to the partner without ADHD to be critical of the partner with ADHD, who typically responds with defensiveness, like, I was gonna do it, or I forgot, gosh, you forget things too. That's a kind of defensive response versus, non-defensive response is, you're right, I did forget that. I'm so sorry. Let me do that. So when this defensive response cycle keeps happening, though, and, with criticism, conflict typically escalates, leaving both of you feeling, hurt and not listened to. And it makes both of you resentful and maybe even lose respect for one another. This is often when contempt comes into the picture. And if you know about contempt, all of us have been contemptuous if we've been a teenager. It's eye-rolling, feeling superior than someone else. It's the most toxic of the four horsemen. It's the number one predictor of divorce or breaking up or separation. Contempt shows that you believe that you are better than your partner and that your partner is less than or more flawed than you are. So it's kind of that air of superiority and judgment. So finally, as these sorts of fights escalate and one of you really gets pissed off, for lack of a better word, the other is likely to stonewall, which is shutting down and disengaging from the conflict. They might tune you out, be there, but the lights are on but nobody's home. They're like, they're kind of waiting for the conversation to be over. And when they're tuning you out and they're not listening, they may even, maybe they even leave the room entirely and just kind of walk out when you're talking. So that's stonewalling. That's also very toxic. They're usually the person who's stonewalling is in a fight or flight, kind of physiologically overly aroused state. And they're often, 100 beats per minute or higher heart rate, and they're trying to calm themselves. But unfortunately, it often makes their partner feel even more pissed off or neglected, ignored. And the problem, with stonewalling is that the problem that we were discussing doesn't actually get repaired. Reconnection doesn't happen, making up, acknowledging each other's frustrations or hurts doesn't happen. The conversation just ends. And so your partner loses trust that you'll show up and compromise and make things better. They just kind of stop believing that you care. So if one of you has ADHD, you both need to learn and practice identifying those four horsemen and then responding with the antidote to help. Non-defensive complaining without blame is the antidote to criticism. And hopefully by learning the four horsemen and how to respond in a less critical, less defensive way without contempt and stonewalling too, you'll set the stage for compromise or repair and being able to move forward on whatever topic is bothering you. Instead, so you have to learn how to complain without blaming your partner. You just have to share your feelings about what's happening and what you wish would happen. So if you typically respond defensively, instead of finding something in your partner, and that you want to criticize, you have to say something that can validate, whatever truth, or find some itty bitty, authentic responsibility for causing hurt or for something that you haven't done or something that you could do better. If you're frequently guilty of contempt, the worst horseman, this superiority eye rolling, sarcasm, belittling, that kind of stuff. That's really important that you learn how to change, stop the eye rolling. Instead of saying something critical that sounds like you're better than your partner, you've got to find a gentler, more compassionate, empathetic way of, appreciating that your partner is a flawed human being just like you, and you both have issues. What they bring to the relationship is different than what you do. So, you have to try to accept those differences between the two of you without looking at one as better than the other. And just like with criticism, you've got to ask for things gently and respectfully without putting them down. And instead of stonewalling, you've got to find ways to soothe yourself so that you're not just seeing red. And when you start to get flooded, you start to feel the heat in your cheeks, or you start to tune out what they're saying. Those are telltale signs that you're getting flooded. You have to say, I need a break, but I'll come back. And you have to go do something soothing, not just rehearse, why you're angry, or listen to punk music or something that hypes you up and makes you even more self-righteous and indignant. You have to learn the signs that you're becoming flooded too, and learn how to better self-regulate your emotions so that you can learn how to lean in, to difficult conversations, those tougher conversations, and stay engaged and responsive. And the research shows that it's critical to see conflict as collaborative, and that in a healthy relationship, your preferences both matter, not just your preferences, but their preferences. They may want more time to do things. You may want them to be more efficient. There's not a right or a wrong there. And you have to recognize that you're both wanting both of you to feel honored and respected in a healthy relationship instead of some sort of lose-win dynamic. There needs to be a feeling of win-win for the relationship to stay healthy, where both of your preferences are honored. So it is important also when we work with couples with ADHD to repair some of the damage that's been caused by ADHD. It's common when ADHD has, wreaked havoc on a relationship for a while without getting help, that it often leads to feeling let down, and it's basically damaged the trust that the partner has for the other person. And so Gottman research shows that trust is built from being attuned to one another's feelings and needs, and being responsive to each other and treating with each other with respect. ADHD just makes this a bit more challenging. When you're easily distracted so much, it can be challenging to hear your partner fully and to follow through with what matters to them. Your attention just starts to drift, despite your desire to stay focused. And so even when your partner is really important to you and you want to please them, this is just difficult. So on top of that, ADHD often means having extra heightened sensitivities and emotional swings, and especially impulsiveness, that might make you more likely to say hurtful things or not understand correctly the meaning of your partner's complaints. Which their complaints underneath, it's really about their needs, and learning how to hear the need under the complaint. So time management issues, often result in impulsively changing focus, and shame is often quickly triggered in people with ADHD. And so defensiveness is really common. What often remains unspoken is the negative self-talk in people with ADHD, and a lot of painful beliefs that they have that, I'm bad, or I'm defective, or I'm worthless. Shame often leads to fear of being unworthy, of being connected to others, and this can lead to self-fulfilling prophecy of behaving in ways that disconnect us from other people. So, we feel worthless and unlovable, so then we hide from the people who love us the most, and then we believe, and even though they believe we're worthwhile, we don't believe that they think that, and so we continue to distance, which makes the relationship worse. So the biggest problem with shame is that it's often felt by the person with ADHD in secret. The longer it stays secret and it's not talked about and shared, the more likely it is that it gets worse. and drives a wedge between, two people in a couple. So talking about shame always makes it go away quicker. And by talking about it with your partner, who has that shame related to their ADHD, it will really help the two of you to reconnect and to begin to understand each other with more empathy and more clearly. Most people probably don't understand how difficult normal everyday things can be for someone with ADHD. Staying on task, getting to a job, remembering details of other things to do in your personal life and for your relationships. So just as important, though, is hearing them out and being on your best behavior, to avoid defensiveness when your partner shares how your ADHD affects them, and that you can just put yourself in their shoes and have some compassion without going on a shame spiral. So don't get back in your head with the shame. Remember that, just because they have a complaint about me doesn't mean that I'm a horrible person. It means I've got something to work on. By both of you trying to be open and honest with more compassion or empathy for each other and yourselves, you're much more likely to rebuild trust and to feel like more of a team that can tackle some of the difficult dynamics at play with ADHD. So navigating relationships and ADHD is difficult, but remember, it's doable with all the research-based tools that are now available, including expert couples therapy, like what we have here at Couples Counseling ATL. You can learn to navigate ADHD together. And if you need some help, if you'd like to start some couples therapy, please reach out today. We'd be more than happy to help you with that. Thanks.